Are we good to go? Okay. This session, unlike the last session, is much more interactive because I'm the ITF chair for IDR. I'm probably one of the long-standing chairs in ITF, and I've been working with BGP since there was a BGP version 1. Don't ask how long that is. I won't probably admit that. That'll tell you my age. So the real question we're having is BGP was developed initially to just have the internet glued together. Other protocols were failing. We created BGP, and BGP's mantra is, does it help your network work? Now, our last speaker gave a fairly good tautology in all the drafts that are in any type of formation in all the working groups. The problem is, what we found is that may not help you in your area, right? And that's what this talk is really about, is a call for feedback. The data center, if you listen to yesterday's talk, someplace in the middle they said, and our movement inside of Twitter was aided because we had this whole large space for private ASINs. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't something that just happened. It's something that was pre-planned, because we've come to realize that the data center world for BGP is much different than the L3 VPN, the L2 VPN, the eVPN, and you may want to lighten your load in the data center because it goes a whole lot easier. So one of the things we know that people use in data centers and in networks that have L3 VPN is FlowSpec. And recently we had a whole bunch of people, about 10 different drafts, that came up and said, hi, I want to add to FlowSpec for blank. And so this is going through that and then asking people to tell me, is this necessary? Why is that important for the IDR chair to hear? In September, the IDR mail list, if you're an IDR listener on the standards mail list, exploded with 500 email messages, because we finally got one of the operators who said, I must have 4 large communities, which will take care of 4-byte ASs. Okay, after it did, it's probably going to go on one of the shortest paths to standardization. I think we may, from call to adoption to standardization, maybe 12 or 14 weeks. The IDR chairs have been around a long time. If that's what it needs to get your job done, for example, if GSHUT, which is not yet standard, needs to be standard to get your customers what you need, please tell us. We can do that. We know how to do a standardization. A lot of the things in IDR go a little bit slower, because what I've been told by a lot of operators is, please make sure you don't get 101 different, my apology to Rohit, but a lot of the people say, I don't want that long list of things. I want just this standard, and I want to make sure it works well before I get a vendor stuffing it in my network. I have several large providers and several data center providers who've told me that's a really bad thing to keep getting the latest revision, because what it does is destabilizes releases, either in the open source or in the actual Cisco, Juniper, Huawei, Ericsson, blah, 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 because the more complexity you put in, the more stuff has to be tested and interactions happen. So help us to help you with your BGP. Now, anybody got any questions on the introduction? Stand up at the mic. This is an interactive session, and I will answer it. Otherwise, I will go through FlowSpec descriptions, and then I will stop. If you have questions about large communities, if you have questions about other things, I've shortened the tech portion of my talk so that I can increase the listen part of my talk, and I'll stand out in the hallway afterwards. Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Rob Hagens, Zayo. Good to see you again, Sue. We just heard about how BGP could become really the API for networks for many different things. There's a lot of additional information you might like to put into BGP, and communities are kind of overloaded with all different kinds of fields from a service provider perspective. Are there efforts underway to come up with a maybe more extensible way to encode sort of generic information that I might like to send along with my route advertisements?
Sure. Route, it depends on the type of information. So you have to dig down. In order to make that answer usable for you, you have to dig down later. If it's a flow spaced, I'll go through some of this. If it's, I want to color my route, which is what all communities are, is coloring the route for some reason. Tell me what you want to color the route is, and yes, there's a whole lot of things that we can do in that fashion, or we can make it simple and register more communities. Initially, people said we don't want registration on communities. Best puts in a whole lot of different stuff into communities. If you need it simplified, I just need more detail.
I'd like to list all my routes. I'm sorry, all my peers and the utilization of the peering connections. So
okay, I'm going to come afterwards and talk that, so I make sure I get my talk, but I think I know what you want, but I need some more details. Okay, well, I can't see it from there, so I'll stand out here so I can see both. Yes, this is it. Okay, so let's go through what 5575 is, RFC 55. It was created under the same circumstances we now see with large communities. A bunch of people said, hi, we're getting spammed by DOA. Denial of service attacks, and we want to get the prefixes out. This is one of those drafts that went from draft to RFC fairly quickly, and now that we're having a second set of denial of service attacks, we've found in some interoperability tests some fixes. So we're going to have to fix it. That's why we're revising it. And people have asked for some additions that they feel are critical. I need to check that. And if so, we've got a Rev 5575. Because if there are interoperability bugs, that's my bottom line. I don't want your code to hit a router vendor or an open source where they won't interoperate, because sooner or later it will break a network. Okay, so that's why you revise it. BGP version 2 is for the SDN approach, because you require ordering. BGP Flow Spec version 1 has a fixed order. It's defined in the spec, and your filters go 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you want to filter something that's not a prefix first, you'll have to have an anycast or a star prefix that you're working on. Okay, so that's the talk. Let me go through it in detail. Okay, so what does 5575 look like? You have an AFI, you have a SAFI. An AFI is an address family identifier, and a SAFI is a sub-address identifier, mostly done for VPNs or sometimes for multicast. You have a length, you have an X-top, and you have all the fill-in. And you have an unreached that looks the same. Okay, looks cool. But we've adopted some other things in order to handle eVPN, which is the L2 VPN, which is 25. And we've had the SAFIs that say it's either a VPN or a BGP VPN. Okay, VPN being a regular IP setup. Now, how do you think about the storage of rules? Okay, the storage of rules occurs when you basically have a flow spec rules list, and you have match filters, which is what a majority of 5575 has, and you have actions. And the actions are fairly simple. I didn't create the third action because I assumed people would realize the first action is drop it. But you can also modify and forward things. Okay? So that's the basic symptoms. And by the way, going back to the gentleman who asked about ODL and other things, some of the policy work coming out of the BGP Yang model and some of the other pieces are trying to actually give you control of some of the filters. BGP Yang, R2S, filter-based RIB are all trying to help you do this through NetConf as well. What BGP provides instead is BGP provides the thing it did in first, which is here's a quick, let's just send it to everybody, okay? It's a distribution, BGP is a distribution for these filters. It's extremely effective if what you're trying to do is get it to all the BGP peers and from that to whatever place your router lets you put it. Okay, problems, let me go deeper. Problems, there's a specification written by the guys who did some interop testing, draft low build batcher IDR flow spec clarification, which is being adopted as a working group draft. It's just simply being adopted because we need to know, is this all the problems someone has found in testing? If somehow you've tested your flow spec because that was your thing you wanted to use and you found some bugs, either send a note to the IDR list or send it to these authors, or if nothing else, send it to me. We're trying to make sure if something's unclear, it's fixed. There is two conflicting flow spec actions from things that the IDR working group has said that was useful. It's either an IP redirect or a path redirect to tunnels. Now, our question for today is, do you need to have the second one in a revision? We've got to have the first one, so if we're going to revise the spec, do you need to have IP direct and path redirect in the same V1? If that's true, then we'll put it in V1 and we'll ship it and we'll run this through the standardization fairly quickly. BGP standardization a bit odd. In order to protect you, the operators, the user of BGP, the IDR co-chairs are unique because we come from a long time of working in vendors or working with code, and we require two implementations. We need to know that when you ship BGP in these fashions where it's actually gone to an RFC, we have a fairly good understanding. Now, your vendor still is your source, but we're trying to help what we can in standards. Now, there is an upgrade for security called Draft IDR Flow Spec OID, which loosens some of the security in BGP. The security in the BGP flow spec is basically, can we detect it came from the right place? There's no track, there's no ID, it's pretty much, we better trust your BGP infrastructure to give you the right stuff and that no one's gonna stuff in a flow spec that's gonna cause you to black hole traffic for your customers. But if it came from the same loving peer that sent you the rest of the routes, we'll accept a BGP flow spec. If that gives you pause, come talk to me. This talk's going to have a lot of, and come talk to me if this is really a problem. Okay, let's talk about new actions. There's a really good set of new actions we've adopted because some people want to, right now we have an action to filter by byte rate. You know, this guy can go ahead, but only by so many bytes. That's the traffic byte rate. Some people have said, well, I no longer count bytes. I want to count packets. Give me a packet filter. Okay, how important is it? Do you have a byte rate translation? Then there's a traffic action which really talks about mirroring your ports. So if you're getting denial of service and you have one of the boxes that does denial of service processing, there's a flag that says turn on the hardware bit that's going to mirror the stuff out of port. Okay, cool. The IP redirect is redirect to a VPN, and the other one is a redirect to a tunnel. It's not even on this list. We have, it's down there on the path redirect. So the IP redirect is redirected to this IP address and VPN, and the path redirect, which is farther down, is actually redirected to this tunnel or sequence. Okay, what's left there? There's a MPLS push and pop in case you want to instruct the traffic that you've been received to be pushed on a MPLS tunnel. That assumes that you're actually running MPLS in there, and that's useful. And then there's an interface grouping, and this came out of France Telecom, so I will quote the source. Basically, they said, okay, FlowSpec's really nice, but for these interfaces, we want to run FlowSpec plus the ACLs because we have something else we want to put in there. We want to take the FlowSpec so we clean it up, but then we want to run the ACLs afterward because we did something with the ACLs to help this client. Okay, that's the basic idea. Now I'll go through a few of the new filters. The new filters that have come on have been for IPv6 Flow ID, which if you listen to some of the people from the data center yesterday, you will realize that they're using sometimes the IPv6 Flow ID and next hop. This does the Flow ID filtering. If you needed next hop filtering, do tell us if you're a data center. There's a whole bunch of stuff for NVO3, which is basically things that look a whole lot like GRE and VXLAN, where you might want to look at your virtual network ID, filter on that. And then there's the label filters. I want to filter on packets coming in with an MPS label and some other EXP bits. Okay? So these are the new filters. Okay, these have been adopted as working group drafts, meaning we found enough interest that we think it's worth continuing to work on it. The real question will be, is it enough that we can go from there? Okay, that was FlowSpec v1. I will pause here in case there are questions. I'll take the I hate it later, but if you have a question, ask me now about the content. Okay, cool. First of all, talking with the IDR chair who's been at this for a while may be like drinking at a fire hose. Am I at the fire hose level for you guys? Please admit it, because I'll slow down. Okay. So the best way after I fire hosed you is to ask questions. If you don't know what the questions are to ask, I'll take a deep breath and try to go slower, but please let me know what I can help with. If you're shy to ask questions in public, don't worry, come see me later. Okay. So, why FlowSpec v2? My previous author put up a note from James Utaro, and James Utaro is AT&T and is doing some advanced work. So Utaro and other people are looking at SDN as a way to do various new features, maybe new security, maybe new management and control of their network, but we're getting the V2 push from people who really want to use NFV and SDN to control pathways. So they would like to get rid of one of the two things you must have for 5575 or 5575 BIS for V1. They would like to get rid of the fixed order. They would like to test MPLS first, or one of the other bytes first, and then have V4 destinations not tested at all. They would like it set by them. Great idea. If two people want to set the order because that works well for them, great. And they want to keep defaults as the current V1 spec. Okay, so in that, we authored this off of the wide communities. Once we get the large communities resettled, by the way, what's the difference? Did anyone ever want to ask me what's the difference between a wide community and a large community? Does anybody want to pop up with the answer? Okay, 2 bytes is the short answer. The long answer is we standardize 4-byte ASs. How many use 4-byte ASs? Anybody? Okay. So the problem with 4-byte ASs is we put wide communities in order to be able to have 4-byte ASs do the same things communities are doing now. Okay? But wide communities, we added some things in order to let some other things people had come in. The operators in September said, we really want the simple form. Just give us, for an expansion of communities to 4 bytes. In other words, supersize me, okay? Okay. Because our vendors say they can actually get that through and implement it, and we have Quagga and we have Open BGP, and all of those guys are willing to do the very simple case. Okay, fine. So that's the difference. The wide communities allowed some addition for these new features. Difference is about 2 bytes, so that you could have some filters on your AS and some other features with order. Okay? So this FlowSpec v2 is still in that range. We may, as far as we know, we're continuing with wide communities, but it's tell us what you want process. Okay. So what's in it? We have ordering, where we would have both the unreachable and unreachable with an order, which means instead of having to specify v4 and then all the other things, you just tell us what order and you tell us the bytes. Again, what's the difference? 2 or 3 bytes. And the same is true with unreachable. Now and then you have the new actions that I specified, and we could add more fairly flexibly. We'll add the new security there. There have been some proposals to add additional security, if that's important. Stand up and say something. And now to my real question slide, where I'm just going to stand here and listen. First, let me start with my first question. How many providers here use BGP FlowSpec for denial of service? Okay, so this is a crowd where this may not be really useful as a question. You can probably take, for anything that has BGP FlowSpec, and this BGP FlowSpec is making its way to open source fairly quickly, and you can use it to distribute your filters, okay? And the rest of it, if you're not using it, this is probably the wrong audience. So we'll take other questions. Anything else you'd like to ask about BGP? How much time do I have? About 5 minutes? Okay, I have a long time.
You have a lot of time.
Okay, I expected some background, but maybe the guys upstairs are doing background with all the BGP. Is there any other questions you'd like to ask on FlowSpec or anything else? Anything you'd like to know about BGP? Since I've got time and I'm the chair and probably have a lot of BGP sitting in my head.
I have a question. If you're not using BGP FlowSpec for DDoS, why not?
Well, that's another question.
Hi, Jason Rokich, Fairpoint Communications. So we're actually in the middle of moving to using BGP FlowSpec for DDoS mitigation, but one of the things that has slowed us down and has slowed down some of our transit peers is lack of vendor support, with some vendors only having recently added it and some vendors only having recently added some of what we would like to see. We'd like to be able to leverage it further. We'd like to be able to offer FlowSpec peering to customers for their own DDoS mitigation. But the filtering actions for what routes we accept via FlowSpec aren't there. They're not implemented. So we don't have a way to securely receive that information from our customers.
So what do you mean by not implemented? Can you give me an example?
So the path validation is critical and fairly basic in terms of, okay, they can only actually announce their own routes.
Yep.
The bigger problem is filtering actions. So I don't have a way on my platform, with my vendor at least, to prevent my customer from changing their next hop to a different VRF.
Okay.
It's that sort of thing that is stopping, I guess.
So you're at a very basic policy engine level where they're not implementing enough to support it.
Right.
Sorry, that's a go beat your vendor up moment.
Right.
It's not a standard moment. We are trying, In another hat, I'm the I2S chair, and I'm trying to make netconf Yang models to do that, but I don't see if the guys don't have a basic functionality in their own CLI that any of the other stuff which makes it easy to get to is going to help you at all. It's basically beat your vendor up. Sorry, I'm in the vendor community, so beating up vendors usually means your account team needs to talk to your development team. So, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Seichi. I work in an ISP. I haven't been to ITF in a while, but we tried to do BGP flow spec for DDoS mitigation about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think it's a real important question that why are most operators not using it to do DDoS mitigation? And just as the gentleman before me said, when we started doing the testing about a year ago, some of the implementations were still very young, and they're in the first revisions. It's not just the routers, but also we're using flow collectors. And then my flow collector can do BGP flow spec, but when I started testing it, there were so many bugs that I just cannot
fell apart.
Go forward with this. And besides, we're doing multi-vendors inside the network, and the log outputs from the routers differ so much from vendor to vendor that it was totally not possible to send message to a NOC that this is what's going on in the network right now. So I think there's a lot of more cleaning up on the implementations to do, and maybe standardization can help out in that way. That the log outs puts where we recommend that it be written in a certain way, not differ totally from vendor to vendor. Mm-hmm. I think the features are great. But when we start trying to implement it and start to operate it, you have to get the information down to more people who are not really bright on BGP technology. They just want to know what's going on, and I think that's one of the things that could be added on.
So what you used to pull it out was either a collector to say what sort of information's in the BGP, or did you just scrape logs and pull it out? Because
okay, that's a really good question. So what we first wanted to do was to detect using DDoS using BGP flow collectors, and use the flow collectors to push BGP flow spec messages to the network. And when it worked, we wanted the routers to send back information that okay, it's working. And though it's working was okay, we'll just have to kind of parse the logs first. But it was really difficult to get readable. Some implementations back then. This is probably the young implementation problem. Did not really have the logs coming out.
It would be really good for me, my co-chair, and if I'll give you my card afterwards, or you can go on IDR. If you'd write up the problems you have, because we will go through some key vendors and tell them.
I really wish that I documented this a year ago. I'm pretty sure things are much more different in the past year. There's been advancements in the implementation. So what I'm thinking about doing is this is a project I'm thinking about doing early next year, that I will do the same test again and see that things have improved. And if not, I'm thinking about taking this to the ITF also. So I will provide more feedback.
That would be very useful, because in the Yang models, which is what everybody points to, the next gen, are personally written flow spec models that work across BGP and installing policy-based routing and just configuring policy-based routing in various things. Because if you've ever tested it, your exact problem is really important to know. And we had hoped that would help the ODL collectors, which most of you know about ODL, and the fact that the collectors of topology has been fairly useful there. We were hoping to put some like that into an ODL or an OPNFV. Yeah, if I've got the name right. I always say it backwards. But they're an open source implementation for both the collector and for like an open source daemon like Quagga, which is where I'm putting the other portion of it. That's a really, I thought that would be a good place for you guys to play and tell us more information.
Great, got it. Thank you.
I'll send, when these are released, I'll send out notes. You can get used to the topology collector. Rohit, where are you? Did he wander off? Did the ODL stuff you're referring to come up with BGP off the collector or BMP?
BMP?
Okay.
Yeah.
Their plans was to, I'm working with the guys who are doing some of that work in Cisco, Eric, and notifications. Our hope is that the notification path off of these
someone
streams.
sent out an email this morning about the BMP and BGP flow spec implementations on it.
Yep,
Was it
yeah.
on IDR?
We're hoping that'll come out and help people at least start to play with it. But as far as I know, the actual Yang models, they've only done the basic BMP and not down to, if the flow spec came out, that's great, because that was on their path. So, thank you. Very good help. Other questions? I'll open it up for one other question, since I'm finished with my flow spec. Is there any BGP feature that is causing you trouble or that you need? How many people are running BGP in their network? Okay, I'm not. I thought maybe you guys were sleeping or something, and then I came in the wrong room. But okay, we're really asking: are you missing some basic tools? We had a wake-up call in September when people said, "We've told you for 5 years we needed large communities, and it's not progressing." And every time we pushed on the wide communities, people said, "We're not getting it implemented." We can go around another way. We just want to make sure that this community gets what they need. No more comments? Okay, you get a couple minutes back in your day.
Fair enough. We are at 31 minutes for the time. We are at 10:49 local time, 10 minutes before break, but you guys can have a longer break. Cheers. Enjoy the rest of the day.